tonight. Appreciate that. Tonight I want to continue and conclude the third miracle in the Gospel of John, which is the healing of the paralyzed man. And we noted the sign that I believe is represented is that of a walk. And there's a progression there, in that the water into wine represents conversion, which is where the Christian experience begins. The healing of the nobleman's son represents faith, which is how conversion is accomplished. But not only are we saved by faith, but we continue to walk in faith. And of all the people that Jesus could have healed at that pool that day, he specifically focused in on a man who could not walk. And that's emphasized in that passage. We too have been commanded to walk. And I knew that, but it really wasn't until I got into this miracle that I began to see how emphasized it is. We noted that the term walk alone is used at least 211 times in the Word of God. It's used in 47 out of 66 books, because that's what the Christian life is like. If you want to know what it's like taking a walk. And there are so many parallels and comparisons. As I said last week, I want credit for my brevity here, because I had 47 books that I could choose from. But I came up with 5 principles, and I attempted to stay within this context of what we learn from the Christian walk. And so we did 3 last week. I started number 4. We will finish number 4 and get into the 5th and final one tonight. But number 1, the first 3 in review. Number 1, the Lord gives us the power to walk. And that is what is emphasized in this passage, beloved, in that the miracle is unique in several different ways. It is the first public miracle in the sign of John, the Gospel of John, and that the first 2 were private, if you will. This one, Jesus takes it into the home court of his adversaries, and more people are aware of this miracle than the first 2 miracles. But it's emphasized, and it's almost like the miracle, beloved, is the platform. And I'm not saying this man isn't important. I'm not saying the Lord didn't care. I'm not saying the Lord didn't love him. He did, but John devotes more time, to the discourse and the debate that occurs after the miracle than the actual miracle. 29 verses. And in those 29 verses, Jesus focuses in on his identity and his authority. He claims equality with God. He calls upon the witnesses that corroborate who he is and what he has done. And he just establishes the fact of who he is. And that's what makes it controversial, beloved. It is the same Lord that gives us the power to walk spiritually. And we note it in the New Testament. Paul tells us in Colossians that we are to walk in Christ. The power source, beloved, is there. We need to be connected. Number 2, we noted this. It is a walk of faith. In one sense, the Lord gave this paralyzed man an impossible command: get up and walk. And to his credit, the man did that. But it took faith to do that. And I believe as soon as he began to move, his legs were restored, the atrophy disappears, and the strength is there. And we noted, he got up immediately with his sleeping mat, and he began to move. The same is true of us. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians, we walk by faith and not by sight. And we go back to something that we learned from the nobleman: believing is seeing. In many instances, beloved, a command that the Lord gives us is not going to make sense from a human perspective. It doesn't matter. It's one of the emphasis of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Lean not under thy own understanding. And I think we need to begin to start throwing in Proverbs 3:7, don't be wise in your own eyes. Don't trust in our empiricism, in our senses, and things like that. And so it is a walk of faith, it is a walk of trust. And again, the Christian life begins with faith and it continues with faith. And sometimes, again, it won't make sense, but God will honor faith. It pleases Him, because without faith it's impossible to please Him. Number 3 then, we need to be aware of excuses. And that is something that really struck me about this account. We've noted that Jesus asks at least 41 questions in the Gospel of John. This paralyzed man is the recipient of one of the questions. Do you want to be made whole? Do you want to walk? And you would think after 38 years, the answer would have been an emphatic yes. But yet it wasn't. Lord, I have no man to help me. It was an excuse. And we need to be really careful of that, beloved. We noted 2 things then about excuses. Number 1, if you listen to the enemy, if you listen to the culture, if you listen to other voices, there will always be an excuse on why you shouldn't do what you should do. There's no shortage of excuses. And in many instances, excuses we often blame other people for our problems. You've been 38 years. I think I've heard most of them. I probably haven't heard all of them yet. But you listen to people, why they dropped out of church, why they aren't being faithful, why they aren't being consistent. And it's usually somebody else's fault. The fancy psychological term is blame shifting. It goes back all the way to Genesis 3, which is where blame shifting began. And that, the Lord, Adam says, Lord, well, the woman you gave me. And then the woman blames the serpent. It's Teflon. Nothing will stick in that passage. Second thing we noted about excuses, and it appears that this man has held this excuse for a long time now. The longer we hang on to them, it can strip us of our hope. And again, I have heard a lot of people say, you don't know how much time has passed. But we see in this passage that Jesus was not impressed with this man's excuse. It's almost like Jesus didn't hear the answer. Get up and walk. And that's what he's going to say to our excuses in 2021. Get up and walk. So we need to be aware of excuses. Number 4, we noted that sin hinders our walk. There's just this, again, beloved, I'm working on Miracle 6 right now, which is the healing of the blind man. The 7th is the raising of Lazarus. In every miracle, there's a faith factor, except this one. And at least it isn't recorded. The relationship between Jesus and this man is unique. There is no indication that he believed. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm saying it's not recorded. With the water into wine, the servants knew what happened. Mary knew what happened. The half a dozen or so disciples that had been called at that point knew what happened, and they believed. The nobleman and his entire family believed. And the feeding of the 5,000, there were people who knew what was going on. When Jesus walks on the water, it strengthens the faith of the disciple. The blind man, his progression of faith is very similar to the nobleman's. The raising of Lazarus impacted Mary and Martha at a minimum. There's no faith factor here, folks. Because we know that after the miracle, Jesus deliberately disappears. The controversy begins. Later on, Jesus seeks the man out. But this is the only part of the conversation that we have. Afterward, Jesus finds him in the temple and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. That's in the present tense in the Greek. Stop sinning. Somehow, beloved, sin has brought the paralysis upon this man. And we know that things like that happen, both physically and spiritually. Paul warns of that in 1 Corinthians, particularly within the context of the Lord's table. He says, don't eat or drink in an unworthy manner. It's because of this that some of you are sick. Some of you have died prematurely. Now, we're not saying that all sin is all sickness is a result of sin. That is not so. Or that if somebody dies before their time, it was a result of sin. That is not so, but it can be so. But that's what Jesus is pointing out here. And we've noted again, beloved, how much trouble can a guy who can't walk get into? And so it's got to be in the heart issue, hasn't it? In his mind, or something's happening there. That's the only portion of that conversation that's recorded. But sin was hindering his ability to walk physically. And it's not hard to figure out that sin hinders our ability to walk spiritually. And I want to pursue that for a little bit tonight. And to go into one of the walking passages in that sin begins with a walk. It's very gradual. It's very insidious. We noted that in the Old Testament, the book of Psalms is the winner. The term walk, and we're going to look at another variation of that tonight, but walk alone occurs in the Psalms 19 times. And so in Psalm 1:1, very familiar, a man is blessed, and this is negative. God believes in the power of negative thinking. There are things that we ought not to do to be blessed, and it involves progress and literal positions. And you've been involved in all three, even tonight. And so, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. Put walketh and ungodly together, beloved. Note that David will categorize sinners in three different ways here. And I think he's doing it for the purpose of restatement. He is doing it for the sake of emphasis. I checked it out. And the idea of the ungodly, beloved, are those who are actively wicked. And so as we progress through life, we are not to walk or to get caught up in a way of life that we are doing things that people who are actively wicked are doing. Are those people in our culture? Yes. I would suggest to you then, the first step, beloved, is dabbling in sin. Very seldom, I'm not saying always, very seldom does somebody do a Geronimo when it comes to sin. Very seldom do they jump in. It begins very gradually. Phrases here that I think we often hear. Excuses. I believe the enemy often whispers in people's ear. It's only one time. No one will know. We often hear the term experimenting. When the drug culture in our culture began to develop in the 60s, I've heard many people in my life talk about, they experimented with some sort of a drug. That's the term they used. It sounds almost sophisticated, doesn't it? It sounds like almost they're interested in science, but no. But that's the term that they used there. But you begin to dabble in sin. Please note this. This is when you will get Satan's best. Because that's when sin, that's the way sin has to be. You've got to get the best first in order to get you to continue to nibble at the hook. Because if you got broke or broken the first time, or, the consequences. In many instances, there probably are not a lot of consequences at this point. It appears that it's fun, it's exciting. There are things like that. But that's how a lot of sin begins. People will dabble in it, or they will begin to experiment in it, but it begins with walking, because the walk goes in both directions, beloved. Let's look at the next two words, stand and sinners. It's a different word in the Hebrew. Sinners here in the Hebrew it's the concept, it's almost like a legal term, someone who's criminally guilty. Yep, they've done it enough that guilt is established. The phrase that I would use, beloved, that goes with this is that, and notice, you're not walking anymore. You've stopped, and you've stopped in the wrong place. And you begin to defend sin. I believe phrases like this: nobody's getting hurt, I'm in control, I know my limits, I can quit whenever I want to. And I'm enough of a jerk. I've said to people, well, do it now then. Wasn't what they wanted to hear, but, and in many instances they didn't, but if you can quit now, then okay, show me that you can do that. But it's not dabbling anymore. And the grip, the noose, begins to tighten. And then the third set of words, sitteth and scornful. Scornful in the Hebrew is again, it's intriguing. It's literally the concept to intercede for. We would use the concept of marketing. And in essence, that's why I came up with this phrase, what you're doing, you begin to draw others into sin at this point. And I would suggest, beloved, and again, notice we aren't just passing through anymore. It isn't that we stopped, we've plunked down. And so the posture is very, very significant. I believe Lot is an example. Yep, thank you, Dennis. And there came two angels to Sodom at evening, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Does that take a little bit of different significance now, folks? That is more than just physical, and he was physically sitting there. It was more than just political, and he had a political role in the city, but it's spiritual. Lot has been completely immersed into the culture of Sodom. He has marketed sin. It's influenced his family, hasn't it? When the angels warn him, you got to get your family out of here. And he goes to two of his sons-in-law. What is their response? Hey, that guy has a sense of humor. Come over here in the middle of the night and tell us that the city's going to be destroyed. What will that guy think of next? They laughed him off, beloved. And I would suggest to you, at this point, when we're drawing others, or when anyone is drawing other people into sin, there are very few inhibitions at that point. And we see with Lot. And again, beloved, I believe it's very significant. The last picture we have of Lot, he is fathering his grandchildren, and Moses' pen stops. And I don't think that's an accident. It's that last impression. Sin will begin with a walk. It will not end with one. So we need to be careful. The solution, then, beloved, and I would suggest this: the process is slow, Satan is patient. And we underestimate both. And in many instances, it's a matter of months or even years. It's not that somebody does a header off the cliff of sin and says, Geronimo, and they jump off without a chute. Nope. There's too many bells and whistles that will go off, at least for a Christian anyway. So we need to be careful about where and how we walk. Just, a couple of verses. This is Zacharias, the dedication of John. He is being prophetic here about the ministry of Christ to give light to them that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. Again, did you ever pick up on the position? Now he's quoting from Isaiah. He misquotes the verse because that isn't what Isaiah wrote. But we know this guy must have known his scripture, and he's not being blasphemous. The people that walked in darkness, but over a course of about 700 years, they had gone from walking to sitting. And it shows the patience of the enemy. Therefore, what we need to do is to be careful of our steps. One of my favorite verses, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. That is a literal concept in the Hebrew, beloved. Steps. That's how you live. You think of the steps that you took today. You think of the spiritual steps, the things you did, the things you didn't do, things like that. Life is made up of brushstrokes. It is made up of steps. And we'll go to one of Paul's then commandments. This is one of the, again, in the New Testament, walk is used 6 times in Ephesians, and this is one of them, and it's the adverb circumspectly. It's the idea of a tightrope. We just need to walk circumspectly. Again, in the creation, beloved, in the state of Maine, we have 2 creatures. They're called perfect walkers. One is the fox, another is the bobcat. And their steps will be. One of the ways to tell the difference between a coyote and a coyote and a fox is that a coyote has a canine and it'll walk like your dog. The fox's steps will be smaller. They'll be directly in front of one another. And one of the ways to tell the difference between a fox and a bobcat is that within a fox track, if it's clear, you'll be able to see the toenails. And with a bobcat, there won't be any toenails because they walk with their claws retracted. So there's some biology along with some theology. How's that? And if you look really closely, the pad of the foot is different on a bobcat than it is on a fox. And there's some really cool things happening there. But it's the idea of just being really careful with our steps, one foot directly in front of the other. It's the idea of a tightrope or a balance beam or something like that. But every time I see a fox track or a bobcat track in the woods, my mind goes to Ephesians 5:15, beloved. Careful of where our feet tread. So we need to be careful of sin's walk. All right, principle number 5. I'm going to call this the controversy factor. And it's one of the things that is definitely emphasized in this passage, beloved, of the verse in John. And this sort of sets the stage for the 29 verses of dialogue. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. They don't deny the miracle, but nobody's happy about it. Nobody is rejoicing that this man has been delivered and can physically walk again. I would suggest to you, beloved, the same thing is true today, spiritually. And what I mean by that is this. If you take your spiritual walk seriously, you're going to create some controversy. Or at a minimum, you're going to create some discomfort. And I think we're naive sometimes, beloved. We want the world to like us. We want the world to like our Christ. And I think that sometimes we're just naive. It isn't going to be like that. I have seen real changes in the 21st century. I think I've seen changes even in the last 5 years. And I'm not suggesting, persecution or anything like that, but we're becoming such a biblically illiterate, less God conscious, that it just makes people uncomfortable. And here's the irony. They like the result of the walk. They like that. If you're a conscientious employee, you don't call in sick every other Friday that the sun's out. You don't steal from them. You make money for them. You're honest. You follow the safety regulations. You raise good, obedient children that are respectful. You pay your bills on time. You pay your taxes. The police don't have to come to your house too much. You don't come in late. You don't come in rum-dum. You don't come in high. They like all of that, don't they? You know what they don't like? They don't like the Christ that makes it possible. And they don't understand the connection between the two. I think that if this had been a quiet miracle, like the first two, if Jesus had just gone up on any other day of the week and had healed this man, I don't think there'd have been any controversy. But that wasn't the point. It was almost, Jesus deliberately chose the Sabbath to heal this man, to expose the foolishness of the rules of the Pharisees. Because they were a one-trick pony. It's all about the Sabbath. It's all about the Sabbath. The same thing will be true with the healing of the blind man. He did that on the Sabbath. They blow a gasket. I think they're probably thinking, when is this going to stop? But even at this period in time, we've got to kill this guy. And again, beloved, the idea that Jesus, C.S. Lewis, Josh McDowell called it the great, trilemma. The idea that Christ was just this nice guy is a complete misnomer, because you don't kill nice guys, you kill threats. And they perceived him as a threat. But it's the controversy factor. And spiritually, the controversy factor continues today. But would this surprise you? It isn't new. And I think we overlook that. We get back to the first century, and I enjoy Justin Martyr. He is one of the early church fathers. He probably was mentored, or at a minimum, knew the Apostle John. He was martyred in 165 AD for his faith. He wrote a phenomenal treatise in defense of the gospel. It's called In Defense of Christianity, and he basically appeals to fulfilled prophecy. There's a logical reason why Christianity is true. It's a really neat document. But anyway, he was very influential in that second century church, and but had that direct connection to the apostle. He said this: the Roman world, though great, offers no hope. And that's it. And indeed, the Roman Empire was great. Vast. Anywhere from 25 to 33% of the known world's population lived and died under the Caesars. The infrastructure, the military. But beloved, there was no hope. The people existed for the sake of the government. The 10% were in pretty good shape. The 90% were nothing but resources. And people were just desperate. And that's why Stoicism and Epicureanism came to the forefront. This was a common gravestone heading. Elpis. Elpis in the Greek is hope. The A negates it. No hope. Wow, that would get your attention walking through a cemetery, wouldn't it? no hope. And then Christianity comes on the scene. And it didn't make sense from a human perspective to put Christianity in the Roman world. But it's a God thing. And the Christians begin to change the culture, folks, through simple obedience. The sanctity of marriage comes to the forefront. You know, in Ephesians chapter 5, when Paul says to husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church, that was revolutionary stuff. We hear it at every wedding we go to today, or almost every wedding, or we used to. That was mind-boggling stuff. Women were nothing more than property. The gospel brings the dignity of women, the sanctity of the home. Christians were adopting children. They were saving abandoned babies because the Roman world practiced infanticide. They were involved in charitable giving. They fed people. They respected the sanctity of marriage. There was a saying in the Roman Empire, Christians will share their tables, but not their beds. That was weird to the Roman world. They literally changed the social structure of the greatest empire on the planet through simple obedience. You would have think that their response would have been, wow, good for you. But it wasn't. We go to Acts 28. Paul finally gets there. He's had a few delays, and somebody didn't get the mail. And he thinks that there are people who are expecting him, and they aren't. Now, they work it out, but they weren't expecting him. And he says to this group, and they don't even necessarily appear to be Christians at that point. Seekers, perhaps we would call them. For this cause, therefore, have I called for you to see you and to speak with you, because for the hope of Israel I am bound with this chain. Beloved, we're probably around 65 AD. I believe that the resurrection occurred sometime in probably the spring of 30 AD, maybe 29. And so we've had Christianity now for about 35 years or a generation. Probably this is his first arrest. Probably his accusers never show up. He was released for a bit of time. He is rearrested in late 67, early 68, and we're pretty sure that he probably was executed by Nero in the June of 68. Probably was one of Nero's last executive orders before he commits suicide. But we have 35 years now of Christianity. Completely changed the social structure. And they said unto him, we neither have received letters out of Judea concerning thee, we didn't get the mail, neither any of the brethren that came showed or spoke of any harm of thee. Beloved, look at verse 22. But we desire to hear of thee what thou thinkest. For as concerning this sect, or concerning this belief system, Christianity is what they're referring to. We know that everywhere it is spoken against. We miss that. There are at least 6 different Greek words for spoken. That didn't surprise me. This is the only time this word is used in the New Testament. Here's the definition. Denied, contradicted, disputed. And the against in the Greek is the same word used for emphasis. Christianity was being completely smeared within the first generation. It's spoken against. It's contradicted. It's denied. Satan is relentless in his marketing, isn't he? And what we're seeing and hearing today just not surprise us, folks. It's the way it's going to be, because if you're serious about your faith, you are going against the flow. And that makes the world uncomfortable. We need to continue to be bold. We need to continue to walk in a steadfast way, in a circumspect way, but don't expect applause. You've signed up for the wrong belief system, if that's the case. The controversy factor continues. And it's one of the things that's emphasized physically about this miracle, but I think there's a real spiritual application there. That's the third sign. Lord willing, next week we will transition into number 4, the feeding of the 5,000. Let me share some requests with you tonight.